World leaders, including those from East and Central Africa, must act urgently to protect civilians from violence by states and armed groups. Now, this is contained in the organization's 2014-2015 report on human rights violations released in Johannesburg yesterday. The human rights group described the global response to conflicts and abuses as shameful and ineffective. Now, for more on this report, we are joined in studio by Muleya Mnyawanda, the Amnesty International's Deputy Director for Southern Africa. A very good morning to you and welcome, Muleya.
Thank you very much.
Now, take us through the issues that is highlighted in this report.
So there are three main issues that I would look at, and the first is really the changing face of conflict and the rising number of conflicts around the continent, but also around the world, and as well as the way the conflicts are being carried out. So you have non-state actors being part of the conflicts, as well as state-sponsored conflicts. The second issue is really around the shrinking space of civil society, and we see this particularly on our continent. And in this region, it's quite a serious problem. We have a problem of shrinking space for civil society groups. Those ones who have spoken against the state have been arrested, disappeared, or have been taken through trials that are not fair. And the major culprits around this issue in this region, Swaziland, we're seeing the space shrinking in Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Angola, and even in South Africa. The last issue I would like to talk about is really around the way that the UN Security Council is operating, where you have 5 permanent members that have veto powers. We're saying in the report that in cases of mass atrocities and crimes against humanity, as well as genocide, that these members should renounce that veto power, because there are so many people that are dying, and we're seeing this across the world, in Syria, in South Sudan. We're seeing it happening across the globe, and so we're asking, those are our 3 major big asks.
Now, Muleya, how did the report come to the conclusion that governments are failing to protect millions of their own civilians from violence and armed groups in their countries? And I'll take, for instance, Boko Haram in Nigeria.
Yes, I mean, for example, that's a good example, because when the Chibok girls, for example, were picked up by Boko Haram, we have information, and we have revealed in the report that the government was aware of the plan by Boko Haram to do that, to conduct the abduction, but they did nothing about it. What we're seeing is really a very cavalier attitude towards conflict and towards people that are suffering because of conflict. We're also seeing a cavalier attitude around respect for international humanitarian law, as well as international human rights law.
Now, I know that your focus is in SADC area, so let's come back to SADC, where it is a problem. Has suppression or dissent been on the rise here in the SADC region? You've mentioned the various countries, Swaziland, for instance, one of them, Mozambique, and even South Africa and Zimbabwe. Yeah,
I mean, the suppression of the dissent has been on the rise, for sure. I'll give you an example. In Swaziland, right now, as we speak, Thulani Maseko, a human rights lawyer, and Becky Makubu, a journalist, are serving a 2-year sentence for contempt of court. They went through a trial that we have, as Amnesty International said, was an unfair trial. In Angola, we've seen the government crushing dissent as well. In Zimbabwe, it's the same. So we are seeing that is a sustained attack on journalists or those who dare to question the status quo.
What is the reasons behind all of this, you think?
I think the reasons for all of this is that governments obviously want to be in power, and they don't want to be questioned. So anything that challenges that position is seen as a threat. And because governments in the region have so much power, they're able to crush that level of dissent in order to entrench themselves and to continue enjoying their hegemony.
Now, you've also called on or urged the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council to give up the power of veto. Why is that important?
It's important because people are dying. People are dying. That is why it's important. For example, you had Russia pulling out of a UN Security Resolution that would have helped save civilian lives in Syria, and they didn't. So they applied their veto power, and you see that lives are continuing to being lost, and all of this is happening because of geopolitics, so it's posturing amongst governments. This is where my interest is, and so I'm not going to do this at the expense of the lives of people.
I want to come back home to South Africa. We've seen the Marikana Commission of Inquiry after the Marikana disaster there, and did that perhaps also highlight the state's use of excessive force in this particular case?
Yes, I mean, there was excessive use of force. We had 34 miners killed, and before that we had 10 people, including workers at Marikana, who were killed by police. And this came through an ill-advised suggestion to go and quell a riot violently, when we saw a cover-up immediately after that on the 16th of August by the police.
Looking at your report, what lessons can we learn?
I think the lessons we learned from the report is that, we've collected all of this information, we have it out there, and governments need to take heed of what is in the report. But I think that civil society groups, as well as citizens, should be aware so that they can start asking questions. And we hope that something will be done about it. And I keep saying that we're not cynical as Amnesty, that things are going to change, because when you bring out things like this, at a certain point, things would definitely change. I'll give you an example of the Arms Trade Treaty, which Amnesty and others campaigned for 20 years. And eventually, on the 24th of December last year, it came into effect. And so it is regulating the sale of conventional weapons. So I do think that things can change, and they can only change if they're brought out in the light.
What next now for the report? The report has been released yesterday.
Yes, so what next? We will continue our lobby and advocacy work. We will continue. We're a campaigning organization. We have 7 million supporters across the globe. We have this report with entries from 160 countries, and so we will continue with our lobby and advocacy activities.
Muleya, the best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming through.
Thank you.
That was Muleya Manyawanda, in studio here with us, Amnesty International's Deputy Director for Southern